Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. So dividing the left, it is an old game. But there are some very new and obviously very powerful players now. In one way, they are familiar. Big corporations armed with vast capital. But they are armed with something else that, say, Carnegie and Rockefeller could never dream of. Algorithms. I am talking about Facebook and Google, which also, of course, owns YouTube, and a few other tech giants we're all familiar with, whose business model is partly built on driving excitement, controversy, rage, which builds an audience, which brings in money for both the platforms and for those who ride the algorithms up. In other words, the algorithm rewards divisiveness and, frankly, rage. It rewards glib talks that make us angry rather than smart, the smart talk that makes us more likely to think deeply and then act in effective ways. And so these algorithms work to the advantage of dumb, destructive, and divisive ideas, even if they are meant and come from decent places. And of course, Jimmy Dore is such a perfect illustration of this. But here is what needs to be said. This episode is not about Medicare for all. I will start with the basic idea that those who've been advocating for Medicare for all for the last 10 years, who have made it the most popular policy in the country, those folks, they're not with Jimmy Dore's strategy because they've been working the mechanics. Let me read a sentence to you from a smart piece by Eric Levitz in the New York Magazine today. Quote, ignoring the structural obstacles to single payer's passage, the fragility of public support for the policy, and the simple fact that people can share political values while earnestly disagreeing about the best way to advance them, all for the sake of declaring Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez an enemy of America's uninsured, is a sound strategy for ginning up interest in your rant-based YouTube show. Again, let me repeat the last part. Jimmy Dore executed a, quote, sound strategy for ginning up interest in his rant-based YouTube show. Okay, and let's not stop here. Why is that a sound strategy? Well, as a YouTube host myself, I will tell you why. Because, of course, the algorithm that drives audiences to your show rewards ranting. Hi, I do an opening for a reason. So do the algorithms on Twitter and Facebook. So if your purpose is to build a bigger audience, do just what Jimmy Dore did. Find someone popular to attack and let it rip. Of course, you must not feel guilty if your viewers are misled by your pointless ideas. Of course not. Or grow disillusioned and cynical because you gave them the notion that if only AOC had a spine, the world could be made better. Now we can blame Jimmy Dore for being cynical and manipulative. But he is just a tool. The toolbox in this case belongs to Google, which owns YouTube. They are the ones who need to be held to the account. That's really it, for creating a system that gives Jimmy Dore the incentive to do what he did to AOC. You can criticize your lawmakers and pressure them, but this was not about that. We need to take these tech companies and their algorithms apart. We will see how they reward the very things we say we don't want: divisiveness, shallowness, racism, capitalism. And here is one more that I feel every day: misogyny. The algorithm makes it harder to have a reasonable conversation. They make it harder for complicated ideas to be heard. And yes, they make it harder for women to succeed here because the audience is overwhelmingly male. And when I say overwhelmingly, I mean 86% of our audience is male under the age of 44. This is not identity politics. This is capitalism. I am extremely grateful, in fact, to all of you who do follow our show. You guys, and I'll say this again, by the way, 86% of you are guys. You are smart and curious, and you want to understand how things work. And that is incredible. And you stick around on Friday when we talk about gender and class, because it's not discussed enough on this platform. And I am so grateful to you. And I'm grateful to the folks who platform women and talk about these ideas. My message isn't that Jimmy Dore is the problem. My message is the tech world we all live in is the problem. Jimmy Dore is pursuing his career in a way that the tech platforms reward. This is about the economy and, of course, how capitalism works. Capital has created an overwhelmingly male audience on YouTube. Young men are understandably mad. Tapping this anger creates a viral effect, and that's what the algorithm does. It rewards rage by bringing you more young men. I'm not saying that women aren't angry either. I'm just saying when I open up my YouTube, I don't get political videos. I get makeup tutorials, which I don't watch. So something's going on here. This is how the right wing grows its audience, of course, too. It is very hard to break through, hard for women, hard for people of color, hard for men who don't feel like yelling. Of course, just ask Sam Seder, compare his numbers to Ben Shapiro's and Dave Rubin's. That's why he talks about this so much. By the way, even if you don't believe me, and sure, I've got an incentive to say this, then go ask Timnit Gebru. She is the AI genius who was fired by Google for criticizing Google's AI just a few months ago. Here is Gebru on NPR the other day explaining her dismissal. Let's play that clip real quick.
When Google ousted researcher Timnit Gebru, she felt targeted.
My theory is that they had wanted me out for a while because I spoke up a lot about, issues related to Black people, women, marginalization.
It's something she really believes.
In other words, this is not about identity politics. This is about a hegemonic corporate power of Google, and it is about the power of YouTube to elevate, reward Jimmy Dore and his cadre for outrage, and not reward, by default, penalize nuance. This isn't about deplatforming. Let's make that very clear. This is not about deplatforming. It is about the ghost in the machine, the algorithm, giving the advantage to some who are making millions at the expense of others. This is what Timnit Gebru was warning about when she got fired. People of color do not get a fair shot. What is more obvious? This is capitalism. Women don't get a fair shot. Progressives, of course, do not get a fair shot. Progressives have to work harder to break through the algorithm, whereas Dave Rubin can go viral for a silly rant. The most popular political shows are, of course, from the right wing. And most of the YouTube political audience, of course, is from young men, almost entirely. And when you don't have a fair shot, you have two choices. You can do what Jimmy Dore did and resort to cheap tactics that are not even backed by the biggest organizers around Medicare for All, like the National Nurses United or Bernie Sanders. Or you can do what we do here at the Nomiki Show, and what Sam Seder does, and what Michael Brooks did, and what Jacobin's doing, Anna Kasparian and Nando are doing. Nuance, process, breaking apart the institutions and introducing authors and strategists. There are so many on the left, as you know, that are doing this and really thoughtfully doing it with very little money. You can work twice as hard to build a relationship with viewers like you guys. And I'm so extremely grateful because I looked at our numbers thinking that we would be hit hard, and you guys have stuck around. And I think that's because we've built a base of support that really cares about policy. And we may even disagree on this, but what I appreciate about our community is that we can disagree and we can discuss the process and not take it personally. So again, thank you. We have an extraordinary show for you today. Eli Merritt is on, and Napoleon Legend and Andrea Rovenski are on later for our panel. We'll be right back really quick after this break with Eli Merritt.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst, of course. Sometimes we book guests in advance, and it's almost like kismet. The topic that they're coming on, well in advance, ends up really just seamlessly working into the show in the opening, which is obviously a response to the news of the moment. That's how we do this on the show. And I mean, I could not have imagined a better guest for this this show than Eli Merritt. Eli Merritt is a psychiatrist. He's an ethicist and an author. He's done writing on political history of the American Revolution entitled Disunion Among Ourselves. It's scheduled for publication next year. He's written for the LA Times, Seattle Times, New York Times, New York Daily News, all these different places. Disunion Among Ourselves is how North-South compromise saved the American Revolution. But there's some other stuff here that I couldn't have imagined a better guest. So Eli, thanks for joining us.
And my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
So I'm not sure if you could see the opening, but I discussed at the beginning of this show how capitalism, not that we don't know this, capitalism has always intrinsically hurt obviously the people of color, women the most. And so I start off the show talking about how there's this division right now happening on the left. I'm not sure if you're following it. If you're not, good for you. You're not on Twitter 24/7, but there's a division on the left right now. And I think, I tweeted something out the other day about how our political discourse in this moment on the left is being dictated by somebody and a group of folks whose audience is 87% young male. And I don't think that's an identity argument. I think that is just a reflection of how YouTube has incentivized rage and incentivized, in some cases, in many cases, chauvinism. And it's left out voices that really deserve to have a seat at the table in pushing forward a certain discourse. And right now, all the oxygen in the room is being sucked up by a few voices that are male. So I'm reading about your book, and I had no idea how much chauvinism was I knew obviously it existed during the American Revolution, but was a present, would I say debate? Is that the right way of saying it?
To run that by me again, you're asking.
Chauvinism, how much chauvinism was part of the American Revolution, the discourse of the American Revolution?
Well, I think you're right about that. Of course, we're going back to the founding of the nation in the 18th century. And we start with an understanding that the entire power structure was not only one of white males, but was of affluent white males. That's where the concept of democracy and equality was very central in their lives, but it was very restricted to that demographic. But one of the beauties of the American Revolution that's been written about by me and others is we can think of the revolution and we can think of that period of chauvinism in two ways. One is we can see the dark side of it. The other is we can see what was handed down, the legacy that was handed down so remarkably during that early founding period. And that is the legacy of inalienable rights, the legacy of equality, and I think critically the legacy of the necessity of a constitutional order in order to constrain power and also to foster liberties. So that's the way I myself reconcile that difficulty of the fact that the American Revolution was, rightly said, a period of great chauvinism.
Yeah, you discussed that between 1774 and 1783, there was this powerful regional chauvinism and government infighting that threatened to break apart the Constitutional Congress. Can you explain a little bit more about those dynamics?
Yeah, well, that's a different type of chauvinism, and that is the one that I'm writing about. I assume the white male chauvinism in the book for the most part, but that's the one I'm writing about. And why I think the book is important is it captures sort of untold history of the American Revolution, but it also has resonance for today. And that is the real focus of this narrative history of the revolution, which is so different from many others. Normally it's military history or biography, is that I'm really looking at the ugly underside of the revolution and the prejudice and difficulty that, in spite of the power structure being white male, they had so many religious differences, regional differences. Slavery was undergirding everything as an incredible difference. So when they came together in the midst of an evolving war, they had great difficulties in reconciling their interest and moving forward. And the energy inside the Congress in the 1770s and 1780s was an energy that was often towards disunion and separation and breaking apart. So that's where the question of how do they transcend that in the Congress becomes important. And it wasn't just higher values and virtues, the ability to compromise. I do believe they had a dedication to transcending their differences that is greater than today. But it was also crisis that brought about that ability to bridge the gap of regional chauvinism that absolutely could have ended up in the 1780s in a breaking apart of the early 13 colonies into different confederacies with civil war happening for sure at that time.
So how were they able to do it? I think what's interesting about your perspective is you're looking at it also from a psychological perspective. So what was it that, what were the mechanics of how they actually were able to come together and put aside some of the other differences in favor of greater unity?
I think that the most important, when we look at polarization and we look at sectarianism, which they suffered from equally as greatly as we do today, I think that's an important thing to recognize. We're living in a moment of what we call hyperpartisanship. I've got to tell you, after reading thousands of letters and other records of that period, our time was certainly no more polarized than their time. And so what I think historically, not only in the period of the American Revolution, but in other periods of history that I've read, what is it that breaks through sectarianism and hyperpartisanship? And I think it's a confluence of several things. I think typically it's crisis. So we see this even today. We see this yesterday. What is it that brought about this $900 billion stimulus bill? It was not just transcendence to cooperation. It was that. I don't take that out of the picture, but it's crisis, and often it's life and death crisis. If you read history carefully, you find that in World War II with FDR. You find that in the Civil Rights Movement. It's often crisis that intervenes on a circumstance where hopefully those who are trying to collaborate are not enemies, and therefore these factors come together and enable them to transcend to a higher purpose. That's another element of it that's so important. The delegates to the early Congress, they were transcending to human rights, restricted, of course, to white males at that time, but nevertheless to their own equality with the British across the ocean. They were being treated like second-class citizens. So there are all manner of fascinating parallels, I think, in spite of the fact that the fight for equality was so narrow at that time.
I think what's so interesting, though, is, when I look at crisis, I mean, we've been dealing with crisis in this country, inequality before the pandemic that was the most historic inequality since 1929, and of course is just going to get worse and worse. But our lawmakers, yes, they were able to put this deal together, a whole whopping $600 that you're getting since the last $1,200 9 months ago. Right. But there's also division in crisis. And so, use this word transcendence. And I think that's such a powerful term to use, because sometimes we have to air out these fights, right? We have to actually debate it out for people to understand, maybe the other side of it, how serious it is, for lawmakers to understand how much anger there is outside of the chambers of Congress because of their lack of the ability to respond. But in that moment, I mean, that was before focus groups, that was before polls, that was before Twitter. Of course, there were rebellions and protests happening, but how did they get to transcendence despite all that? I mean, we're not at that point at all. And we have all the tools and, frankly, the education now in a more universal way for transcendence. Hell, we've got Marianne Williamson running for president. Where's the transcendence? How are they able to do that?
Well, I bet we will agree that one of the core problems we have is there's not enough transcendence, that people are not dedicated. There's too much what one very good book calls groupishness, kind of a righteous groupishness. So I'll comment just briefly on something we might want to come back to, but when I talk about equality in this case, economic equality is obviously of extraordinary importance. And there's a great book called The Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution by a colleague at Vanderbilt about that. But in this case, when I'm talking about equality, I am really strictly talking about constitutional, political, and civil equality. But in answer to your question, I'll give you the example of how do you transcend of John Adams, of course, from Massachusetts. He was one of the most important politicians and diplomats of the American Revolution, went on to be president. He has done some beautiful writing really about himself, in which when he first went to Congress, he detected in himself and wrote about this to his wife, Abigail Adams, truly beautiful letters in which he said, I am noticing a big problem up here. And then he went on to describe all the many ways he felt that New England as a region was far superior to all of the other regions. he went on and on, we're superior in this, but then he stopped and said, but don't you see, this is the problem in politics. He felt like through self-examination and recognition of his self-superiority, in this case regional, that he needed to work to neutralize his own righteousness, neutralize his own self-superiority, which would, of course, enable him to let go and make sacrifices of things that he felt were beyond compromise. So that, in answer to your question about transcendence, I do believe it's a psychological phenomenon. The group itself can encourage transcendence, or individuals can discover it within their own personal psychologies. And then if they're lucky, they, as leaders, they take that out to the larger group.
I mean, what was happening in the Continental Congress? What were the things that they were arguing over that made it so divisive?
Well, in the beginning, before the war began in 1774, they went to Congress after the Parliament enraged over the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Parliament really acted in a very imprudent way, very punitive series of acts called the Coercive Acts, which basically put, speaking of martial law, which came up recently, it put Boston under true martial law and took away all their powers of government. So all the colonies came together, and what were they going to do? They didn't want to launch a war, and they actually didn't want to launch into independence. All they wanted was the restoration of their rights. So the instrument that they had historically used to do that was economic civil disobedience. So getting to the answer to your question, they first came in, and Massachusetts in particular, and New England in particular, wanted the Congress to join in a total embargo of all trade with Britain, meaning imports and exports. Well, Virginia came with a directive from its assembly saying it will join in immediately with embargo on all imports, but for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they owed a lot of money to the British, they would not be able to join an embargo on exports for another year. So that economic clash was one of the most significant things. And then they had different interests. The southern colonies were interested in westward expansion. New England was interested in gaining fishing rights for cod and haddock in the area of Newfoundland. That's one thing. Who would be the general of the army? How they would appoint officers. Slavery was there and very disapproved of by New England at the time. But there was not a fight over whether they should end slavery or not, but how the states would be represented. Would slaves be counted as people? Would slaves be counted as wealth? They fought over all of these things and 12 other things I could tell you about.
It's super fascinating. I mean, I've always, in recent history and some of these recent interpretations of the founding fathers and going into the Civil War and beyond, was slavery just one of these unifying forces? Because you can be transcendent, but there's also just bargaining chips. And if they could come together in some sort of, North-South deal or whatever regional deals, I mean, this is pre-Civil War, to have sort of a similar perspective on slavery in terms of an economic argument, being self-sufficient, if you're not dealing with Britain, export or import, you have to be able to maintain your own self-reliance, right? And the workforce, of course, were slaves. So was that sort of part of their unification?
Well, what I can say is that a careful reading demonstrates that in the New England in particular, there was shock over the widespread slavery in the southern colonies. But with rare exception, no one was advancing an argument of ending the slave trade or ending slavery at that time, simply because it would be too explosive. They did discuss that, and
it affected their trade though too, right? It protected their economy.
What, slavery?
Yes, in the North.
Yes, that's true. That the northern, particularly the New England ships, were carriers of slaves. So there was that, yes. But the voice of abolition was present at even before the Declaration of Independence. It was a weak voice. We don't know privately what people spoke about, but Thomas Paine, who is well known for writing Common Sense, just before writing Common Sense, wrote a really remarkable document called African Slavery in America, in which he deplored slavery, deplored slave trading, said we're hypocrites if we call ourselves Christians and we continue to practice this. And he actually went on to recommend emancipation and said what has to happen is we have to give each freed slave a plot of land and reunite families that had been broken and give them a way to make a living wage. But the voice was so weak, it was there, but it was so rare that it emerged. But it was there, obviously. I mean, the best way to characterize the history of slavery in this country was done so just before the Civil War, and it's the irrepressible conflict. It was there even when it wasn't being discussed as a powder keg political issue. It was there just waiting and waiting to either be resolved with emancipation or explode.
And just going back to the founding fathers and their ability to sustain this document, I mean, is the root of it just because there was this transcendent approach to dealing with it? Is that sort of your basis that, obviously the Constitution's been amended and we can talk through, the problems with it. But it has been transcendent. I mean, this is a living document that somehow, despite our divisions then and today, has been able to sustain itself and frankly, in some ways, defend our most vulnerable communities in this country. So, I mean, is it because of that kind of approach, their way of thinking about things in a much more philosophical lens than a political, the way that we do today when we pass legislation?
I think some of the reasons that our Constitution has succeeded, as you say, as a living document, which has enabled, however painfully and however slowly, which has enabled a widening circle of access to equality for people from different racial and religious and demographic backgrounds, is precisely because citizens of this country have worked very hard to maintain both the democracy and, separate from that, the Constitution. I mean, we don't live in just a democracy, we live in a constitutional democracy. But the other essential element that I think we're not talking about enough is the ultimate glue of a constitutional democracy is ethical leadership. So I think for the most part, if we look back at our history, everyone's flawed in one way or the other, but if we look back, this country has done relatively well in maintaining ethical leadership in high political posts. And the greatest crisis that we have experienced in all of our history in violation of this principle occurred in 2016 with the election of Trump, who I think you also know my other area of wide writing is about Trump as a demagogue.
Right.
So I just think that ethical leadership and that commitment to the principles of democracy and the commitment to the Constitution, to changing the Constitution, not overturning the Constitution, amending the Constitution, not overturning the Constitution, with this glue of ethical leadership. What I worry about most today is the loss of the ethical leadership. And the truth is, the constitutional democracy will break apart finally and dissolve and fail if we don't find a way to begin to minimize all of the demagoguery. The worst place for it is in the White House. And I just don't mean inflammatory language. I mean Trump violating the law, but also in our cable news, there's so many demagogues, and social media is so filled with demagoguery, meaning people get attention through the expression of hot emotion. And it works. People get popular, people make money, but it's not good for our democracy, that's for sure.
Well said. Perfect way to end this interview. The theme of the show today, the real work, and this is where we have to pressure, hopefully in the new administration, our tech companies to be much more thoughtful in their approach, because we have to be very real. These platforms are not democratized. They're not. They don't give equal opportunity to everybody. They give better opportunity to those who are able to push rage and crazy conspiracy theories, frankly, in many cases, including our president. And that, chips away at every single semblance of whatever form of government that we do respect, whatever we have in our government that we do respect in terms of lowercase democracy. So I greatly appreciate this conversation. I think it could not come at a better time. And your book comes out in 2022?
Yes, Disunion Among Ourselves. The subtitle is not set yet, but I think the best subtitle is the Untold Story of the American Revolution.
Fantastic. Well, we'd love to have you back on then. Maybe we'll have solved these problems by then.
If we make some progress, that would be enough.
Maybe just the platform stuff. That's the algorithmic stuff. We'll start with that.
Good.
All right. Eli Merritt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Nomiki. Thanks.
Take care. All right, before we go to our next break, I just want to, he mentioned Thomas Paine. I'm so happy he mentioned Thomas Paine because our book club starts, if you don't know about it already, go to patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We have 3 different book club levels. It starts on January 1st. And the first book that we're going to be covering is on Thomas Paine. Why is Thomas Paine important in this moment? Well, you just heard a little bit about it. Katrina vanden Heuvel said, must reading for today's aspiring Democratic rebels and radicals. It is, of course, Thomas Paine and the Promise of America by Professor Harvey Kaye, regular of The Nomiki Show. He has so generously offered to give a copy of this book for our show, frankly, to the first first 10, I think. So the first 10 who sign up for this book club may have already happened right now at this case. But anyways, this is our first book that we're covering. I am happy. I'm going to announce our next 4 books because what happens is if you sign up for the book club, you get either a choice of 1 book a month, 2 books a month, or 4 books a month. And you get to choose which one you want, which book club you want to be a part of, obviously, but also which book you want it. You'll get a copy of the book in the mail. This is how crazy this is. So our first book is Thomas Paine, The Promise of America by Professor Harvey Kaye, and we will have a whole conversation about that. We have had the author on already, Nina Lakhani, Who Killed Berta Casares. I'm so excited to read this book. I can't even wait for it, but this is our second book in the book club. Of course, she was an indigenous environmental leader who was killed in Honduras. And then I mentioned this on the Majority Report today. Our dear friend Jane McAlevey, No Shortcuts, her book, Organizing for Power in the Gilded Age, in the New Gilded Age. This is what we should be reading right now. We want Medicare for All to pass. Read this book. She discusses how to break down power structures, power map. That's just some teaser. It's going to be a really thoughtful analysis and a good conversation. And then this one suggested by our dear friend Arun Chaudhry. It's been on my list for a while. The Plunkett of Tammany Hall, a series of very plain talks on very practical politics. Fascinating book. I already read it, but I'll read it again. And I can't wait to discuss it with folks who will understand it and who are going to take part. So it's not just folks who are going to sign up for the book club, but people who are going to be part of our conversations, whether it's authors, activists, people who've read these books, they're going to be in conversation with us. So you will also get a podcast each week if you sign up for the 4 books a week, 4 books a month, or you get it for 2 or 1 book. So go check it out. Patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We will be back in 2 seconds with our panel. Oh, hey, by the way, have you smashed that like button? Are you subscribed to us on YouTube? are you a member of our Patreon? That's how you get, I mean, obviously I just told you about the book club, but not only do you get exclusive content on Patreon, special interviews, but, you can get swag like our little mug here, very exciting mug. We have a bag, we have stickers. Make sure to get in there, subscribe, like all that. All right. I'm excited about our next guests. Napoleon Legend, of course, is one of our regulars. He is an Afrobeat hip hop artist. He is an activist. He has been featured on so many different places. He's got an album you can get. What's the album called, Napoleon? How do we find it?
DBG, yeah, on all platforms, Dragon Ball G.
Awesome. Go check it out right now. And welcome to the show. First time guest, Andrea Rovenski. She is a podcaster, vlogger, comedian, and the host of the YouTube show Above It All, which I am so grateful I discovered you. I'm not saying I've discovered you. I mean, I personally, for the first time, discovered you.
You uncovered me. I was an archaeological dig. You found me in an ancient ruins of a pre-civilization. I appreciate that.
Well, it was very difficult. No, a dear friend of our show, Jake Seligman, who is part of the Ben Dixon show, shared your video, and on Jimmy Dore, which I'm so done talking about, but we have to talk about it. Okay. All right. So
I'm completely okay with talking about Jimothy. He's a pretty funny character as far as I'm concerned. And personally, I wish people would take him less seriously. And that's kind of my message.
I love the nickname Jimothy.
Appreciate that.
It was very funny. All right. So let's, there's this New York Mag article that went up today about, I mentioned it in the top of the show, about Jimothy's response to AOC. Can we just show that article so people do we have it ready? Maybe not. All right. That's okay. We talked about the top of the show. There we go. So, nope, wrong one. Just kidding. That's Rand Paul.
Oh, no.
Oops. Oh. I think we got the links wrong. Anyways, there's this article in New York Mag today. It's getting circulation, and it's in The Intelligencer, Eric Levitz. The title is Left's Most Naive Cynics Have Turned on AOC. I come from the perspective, as much as this has become so divisive, I don't like calling anyone on the left naive. These are working people. People are angry and upset that our government's not responding to this crisis, to the many crises. But there is power in that word naive, in that most of us have never worked on Capitol Hill. Maybe we didn't see Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. But what it did kind of highlight is the predatory behavior. And I wish the title was actually different, that there is, whether it's conscious or unconscious, there are, when you push out this divisive type of rhetoric, maybe he was conscious of it, and maybe others who are supporting him are not conscious of it, it naturally pushes out really nuanced conversation. I'm going to start with Napoleon, because I see you shaking your head. What do you think of this whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, the way Jimmy Dore, I think he understands his crowd very well, and he's driven by emotion, and people are going to respond to that, and sometimes rightfully so, because people are angry. So that's something that's very appealing to them on a visceral level. However, if you look at his track record, it's always about destruction. It's always about mudslinging. And when it comes to the left, solidarity is a big word. I mean, that's what we strive for. We want to listen to each other. We want to be able to talk to each other. We want to be able to exchange ideas in an intelligent manner and communicate our things well. So I don't think it's even a thing that we're all for Medicare for all. We all want it, even AOC. If we just don't agree with the way Jimmy Dore wants her to proceed, doesn't mean you could just throw mud at one of our best allies like that. And that matter. It's okay to criticize her. It's okay to push her in a certain way. But this whole rhetoric that we're using and the way matter we're going against it, I don't think it's just a good way to communicate. And it doesn't show any type of leadership and any type of a messaging that's going to bring us to the future. There's the Georgia Senate election about to go in a few weeks. They could use all that against us, and they could use these type of things when we need these victories. So there's a timing. And when you're just dealing with emotion, you're not taking that in consideration, and among a lot of other things.
Andrea, I mean, you did this video, and folks, check it out. We'll put it in the link. We, as you guys know, I come on the Majority Report beforehand, so I wasn't able to break it up, but we'll cover it this week, I promise. But go check out her video. We'll put it in the information section. And I think, what you did so well is you broke down the incentivized structure of not having nuanced conversation. And there are people who have real ideas on how to pass Medicare for all, like National Nurses Union, who I think is owed a lot of credit for making Medicare for all such a popular bill. I mean, they went out there and they organized their members. They showed up at every debate. They showed up at every DNC meeting. They showed up at everything. And they pressured folks who would have never been in our corner, even if it's just as a co-signer, to join the Medicare for All bill. And they made it a topic of the presidential debates. So much so that the crazy people who were put on stage to run for president, who I think literally were just there, I can't even remember their names now, were literally just there to challenge Bernie Sanders and anybody on stage who supported Medicare for All. And guess what? It came out more popular as a result. But there are limitations. Once you get into institutions that are controlled by other people, the power mechanics are not in our favor. And that's why we have to be really thoughtful. So Andrea, I mean, you broke it down so well. Why do you think people are I mean, I know everyone's angry and I get it. Like we'll get to more stuff we can be angry about in a second, but why do you think Jimothy more importantly, why do you think the smart people who are supporting Jimothy's goals are not taking the more reasonable approach, the Matt Stoller approach or the Dave Sirota approach or the NNU's approach, if you just want to go there, or Bernie Sanders' approach?
Well, I mean, I would like to first start this out by looking at that primary process, right? There was one candidate who supported Medicare for all, no equivocations. That was Bernie Sanders. Who did Jimmy support? Right? It wasn't Bernie Sanders.
Tulsi Gabbard.
If his whole
who did not support Medicare for all, by the way.
Exactly. If his whole thing is about Medicare for all and that's his thing and that, like, you know what? All right, that's cool. But that it's clearly not the case that he is like a Medicare for all person. This is the most important thing to me, because when the best chance we had to get Medicare for all was during the primaries, right? We are probably not going to get it maybe for another 5 to 10 years. And that's like a good scenario at this point, right? Our best shot was in the primaries. And when push came to shove, it wasn't Bernie that Jimmy was supporting. So I find that to be very interesting. He does not have the credibility here to try to like spearhead a Medicare for all movement. And also, like, his whole YouTube show is based around getting attention. Now, I've been doing a YouTube show for about a year now. And I know whenever I would make a Joe Biden video, for example, especially like the month before the election, right? I would get like 10,000 views. And there would be Trump supporters going like, wow, look at Biden, he's crazy. And I made like one video I made like $100. And that's like, I'm small here.
Well, it's a big deal. That's, I mean, I don't think people
that can
understand.
Help pay the rent, like it, because, I'm not buying a $2 million house. Let's just put it that way. So I understand the impetus to cash in on popular things. And one of the things that really struck with me, I think it was like maybe a week or so ago, it was around when this was first gaining traction, was Jimmy was talking about like, I came up with this idea in 2 weeks. It's so simple. Everything is so simple. I came up with it in 2 weeks. You came up with Medicare for all in 2 weeks. That's your idea.
Did he write the bill? I'm sorry.
Apparently he wrote the bill. I don't know. My whole thing is that people, the Jimmy crowd are synonymizing, if that's a word. It might not be. I'm not sure. I'm not an author, but they're saying that Jimmy Dore is like he is the personification of Medicare for all. If you don't like Jimmy Dore, you don't like Medicare for all. There's no ins and outs. There's no nuance. There's no gray area. If I say that I don't like Jimmy when he goes up on stand-up shows talking about how transgender people are men, if I say that that's rude, if I say that's offensive, then I don't like Medicare for all, apparently, because those things make sense. That's logical. That's what a logical person would say, apparently. But I just find the whole situation to be bizarre. So the video you referenced is I think like a month ago, 2 months ago. I don't know. whenever he says like some really bizarre stuff, I like making a video about it. Because one of the primo things that I do on my channel is I love like mocking people that say like really ridiculous things. And I think Jimmy Dore is a very good example of that.
He's a comedian. He should be able to take it.
He should be. But I've asked him, hey, can you let me on your show? And he's always ignored me. So, hey, maybe, I don't know.
This is a big part of this, right? Everyone's like, oh, why are you making about Jimmy Dore? Jimmy Dore is making about himself. Let's
Absolutely,
be very honest.
Exactly.
It's about Medicare for all because we care about it. We organized. I'm saying this okay? I spent personally, and it's not about me, but I know other people because I saw the people organizing around Medicare for all. Hundreds of thousands of people, possibly even millions, called lawmakers' offices. We had folks on storming Capitol Hill on Medicare for all. You had great leaders in NNU and other leaders attach themselves. This has been something that has been so coordinated and thoughtful ever since, we lost this fight with Obamacare. And he is making it about himself. And other people are clout writing it. And that is dangerous for democracy. And if you, as I am, I'm going to share right now, I'm on Medicaid. I don't talk about my personal finances. I don't talk about any of this. Trust me, I have family members who are ill. We would love Medicare for all immediately, as so many others who are sick and ravaged and hurt by this. But instead, this argument is taking up way too much airtime, even on our show. And I know we've talked about this extensively, but I wanted to have you on the show to give your version because it is important to platform folks who are not part of that little orbit. Let's move on to a different topic because I'm done with him. Let's talk about things that are circumstantial to people's lives immediately. I'm not saying Medicare for all isn't. It will take 2 to 3 years to pass if that's the case, because we'll need some more votes in Congress. Let's talk about the relief that Congress does not understand Americans need, whether it's rent relief, paying off their health care debt because they didn't have health care. Let's play that clip of Rand Paul that we almost played a second ago.
This bill is free money for everyone. Proponents don't care if you're fully employed or own your own house or own your own business. Free money for everyone, they cry. And yet, if free money were the answer, if money really grew on trees, why not give more free money? Why not give it out all the time? Why stop at $600 a person? Why not $1,000? Why not $2,000?
That's a good question.
Right?
Use that in a campaign ad. First off, $2,000. It still won't, cut into most of everybody's debt and expenses from the last 9 months. What's so infuriating about this to me is it just reeks of absolute disgust for working people. It reeks of it. And I don't know how that argument works right now.
It's also like just ignorance. Like the idea that there's no difference or distinction between 600 and 2,000, like these are just numbers. They don't mean anything. Like a lot of people I know, like a lot of people are like a $2,000 behind on rent, and that $2,000 would make sure that they don't lose their house in the middle of winter time in a pandemic depression, right? So it's just the idea, like they just don't even know what, like Nancy Pelosi also said $600 is a significant amount for working families. They have no understanding or grasp of what money is for most people.
It reminds me of Napoleon. I want to hear what you think on this because you've spent a lot of time in Europe, where even in austerity-driven countries like Germany or right-wing countries like Poland, they're able to recognize that working people and their economy is more successful when people's basic needs are being addressed. But this reminds me of when George H.W. Bush could not tell you the price of milk. He had no sense of the price of milk. And that, some people say that was a big part of him losing his reelection. Napoleon, what's your thought?
That's right. It's like I don't even see. I don't know. Like nowhere in that speech is he tying it to the reality of what people are actually going through. It's like there's a reason why we're discussing these numbers. It's because that's life or death for some people. That's being in a house or in an apartment and being on the street. That's like it's everything. There's people with kids, with children. He doesn't seem to care. For him, it's all about, it's okay when he votes to cut taxes for the ultra rich who doesn't, who he feels don't have to pay their fair share. But when it's to give back to people who actually need that to survive. It's such a vile thing. Like you say, it's total disregard for people who don't have it, but for the average working people, for the average poor people.
There's more to this clip that's let's just play the rest of it.
Maybe these new free money Republicans should join the everybody gets a guaranteed income caucus. Why not $20,000 a year for everybody? Why not $30,000? If we can print up money with impunity, why not do it?
Wait, we actually can print up money with impunity.
Don't
Don't give him a copy of Stephanie Kelton.
Yeah, exactly. Like, these are wonderful questions. If only, he talked to regular people, he would know the answers. It's just,
Last time that happened, his neighbor punched him or something. So don't.
That is true, actually. He's probably afraid. He probably just doesn't walk on sidewalks anymore. Just random people. Anyone who's not wearing a suit and tie is probably the enemy in his mind. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I mean, Napoleon, this is, I feel like we need to do a compilation of these ads and just air them. I mean, this is like, we were talking about this in the majority report, how Nancy Pelosi just doesn't have a messaging strategy. It's right there. They're delivering it to you, on a platter.
Right. Exactly.
Does the messaging strategy need to be in an ice cream container or something for her to look into it? I really don't understand.
No, it has to be in a $12,000 refrigerator.
There you go.
That's exactly what we need. He's saying everything that's wrong with this system and the opposite of what people actually want and need. So it's right there, like you said. Slam dunk.
Slam dunk. I mean, so ultimately, we're going to have $600 whopping dollars to, I don't know, pay our utilities, I guess. I'm not sure how much in some food for families, right? But we need to do more, right? And I think it's one thing to bitch about this stuff. It's another thing to actually put out a course of action. And so I'm just going to throw one last piece out to you guys before we wrap up. My theory of change right now is really through the unification of different unions to pressure the bigger union, AFL-CIO, to pressure our lawmakers who are, well, at least the Democratic lawmakers, have to work with unions. And I think that's really the way we're going to be able to get immediate change. But do you guys have ideas? Because I do feel like it's important that we present different ideas and a strategy moving forward. Napoleon, let's pull some international stuff. You know, other folks around the world are providing more for their citizens. Have you heard anything different?
I mean, like I said, like in Germany, it's like you said, it's more austerity, but they don't have these type. I don't feel like these type of problems. I talk to people over there, and it's humane. Some people, if you don't have the finances, the state will provide money for you. People have healthcare over there. You don't really see people. I didn't see people on the streets or anything like that. And it's just a totally. Anecdotally, when I talk to people, they see America as, they call it predatory capitalism over there. It's kind of like everybody for themselves. That's the vibe that they have. So just even being on the other side, the perception of what's going on in America is exactly that. And I think that we just got to keep pushing and showing people that it's possible that there's another way and that we deserve this. This is not free money. We're paying taxes. So it's not free money. That money doesn't come from anywhere. It comes from our pockets. Every time we buy something, every time we pay income taxes, everything else, it's money, but we want to redistribute it back to us and not necessarily all going to military or other things that we don't need.
You mean $500 million going to Israel isn't your priority no?
Wasn't there $3 billion for the Space Force? I think I saw that in there. You just have to have rations of whatever on the moon before you can feed people in your own country. Of course.
I mean, but this is also why, I mean, if we want to, if neoliberals hate the right wing so much, and if they hate Trump so much, then they've got to do something, because this is how the right wing, this is how the populists on the right wing, or supposed populists, pseudo-populists on the right wing, neoconservatives are able to tap into frustration and anger. Is they see division, they see economic instability, and they put people on YouTube and put people in different spaces, Tucker Carlson, whatever, who preach conspiracy theories. And of course, they point to Nancy Pelosi and her ice cream palace. I mean, that's That's it. That's how they're able to pray. If they just provided, which we can afford, of course, the most basic needs to Americans, it would eliminate the rise of Trump right-wing fascism. And look to Germany. If you want any case for providing to your citizens so nobody politically capitalizes off of economic division, look to history.
And I think like there's also an opportunity, I believe, to engage with people on the right who need things that are angry for the same reasons as people on the left are angry. We just have to find a way to do that where they could understand that this is possible. Like whatever Rand Paul is trying to mock, this is actually the solution to a lot of our problems.
Well, there was a poll that came out that said 88% of Americans wanted a $1,200 stimulus check, and we still only got 600. So yeah. I find that to be just bizarre. It's just ignorance. They just don't care. They just
free money, Andrea. That's what the Heritage Foundation told him to say. It's free money.
I wish it were free money.
Polls don't matter, clearly. I mean, this stuff, it's not influencing anybody. We're past the point where phone calls, polls, frankly, even showing up on the streets, I think, is making a difference. I think it's really going to be withholding your labor and leveraging the labor and your pocketbooks to make a difference.
I absolutely think so, yeah. We're going to need to do some very, very historic demonstrations. Like, I think we need to do like an occupation of Washington, D.C. or something. Mm-hmm. Like something that like, we can pinpoint. I apologize if you can hear the dog in the background. Okay. It's something we can pinpoint, right? And just show them that we do not accept or tolerate what they are doing. It's just theft. It's rioting and looting, except in corporate form. They are stealing our money and they're giving it away to the Space Force, an imaginary fairy tale thing that Donald Trump made up that turned into a sitcom that's funnier than the actual like situation because, but my point is it's ridiculous. They create. And what is the Space Force? It's another way for them to take our money and give it to their friends. It's another excuse. It's another column on their invoice, just more money that they can waste. That's all it is.
Yeah, they talk about government waste all the time.
All that, right? It's just ridiculous. It's just absurd.
They're obsessed with government waste and how we're going to pay for it and all these lines. And it so easily can be flipped in this moment when people are paying attention. Napoleon, let's do final thoughts.
Plus, I want to add tax the rich. That there's some people that are gotten this money is around. We need to tax the rich, tax the corporations so they pay their fair share and everything like that. I just think that we need to stay focused and stay unified. We all want the same things, and there's a better ways of doing it and there's wrong ways of doing it. And I think it's pretty obvious that we're making strides. And I think it's these times of crisis is an opportunity for us to get significant change going forward if we play the game right.
I'm going to end with one thought that it's not either or. I just want to end with this thought. Even if there wasn't a tax the rich campaign, even if the rich couldn't get that passed, there's still enough money to pay for these things if we allocated them to the right places. So we shouldn't be dependent on also taxing the rich. We should just stop funding the Space Force, or frankly, just fund the people. There's no money's left over. There's money.
Right.
You don't care about the deficit when you're sending it to Israel. Interesting. Okay. Guys, thanks so much. The money's there. The money's there. All right. We become a stronger country if you want to use patriotism, if you provide basic services to your own people.
I prefer patriotism.
I love it. Go check out Andrea's Patreon and, of course, her show. What's your Patreon account? We don't know.
My YouTube name is Cyberdemon531. I made it when I was a teenager. I like video games. I'm a video gamer. I don't really have any Patreon exclusive content. I tried doing that and then no one watched them, so everything is free. But if you want to give me money, I accept money. I love money. I appreciate money. And can I plug my show later? I'm doing another thing tonight.
Yes.
Tonight. I'm going to be playing The Grinch on PlayStation as part of my annual series, The War on Christmas. And in this game, you kill Santa Claus with rotten eggs. So we're going to stick it to the right wing and we're going to kill Santa Claus live on stream and you can check it out.
I love it. Napoleon, what's your album again? about you?
Dragon Ball G, but I have a whole catalog. You could go through it. I did a song with the Surfs called King of the Griffs, where I'm
saw
calling
that.
out the Griffs. So you could check it out. Also did a dedication song with Mundo for Michael Brooks. Rest in peace to my brother. You could check it out online.
We're gonna have to play that next time you're on. I forgot about that until today. All right,
Sure.
cool. And everybody else, thanks so much for joining us. Everybody else, make sure to join our book club. As I mentioned, our first book is Thomas Paine and the Promise of America. Go to patreon.com/the Nomiki Show. There's 3 levels. The next book is going to be The Death of Who Killed Bertha Casares, of course, the famous indigenous environmental activist, excuse me. I am so excited to read this book. We interviewed the author, Nina Lakhani, who's also faced death threats around the world for covering this story extensively. And then, want to know how to pass to organize around Medicare for All? Then check out our dear friend Jane McAlevy's book, No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age. And then finally, we're going to be doing Plunkett of Tammany Hall. This is all in January, so go check it out right now. Also, little plug, I'm going to be on the Ben Dixon Show tonight, live stream. What time am I supposed to? I think I'm going to be on at 7 o'clock. Maybe not. Maybe if I say this, we will absolutely do it at 7 o'clock. So go check that out. Go to Ben Dixon's show, dear ally of ours, dear friend, and let's do some shout outs. JL, $20. Thank you for having Andrea on the show. Check out our daily stream, Above It All, for entertaining Left is Best content. Thank you, Nomiki fans. Thank you to Andrea for doing the great work. Unknown Story, Andrea referendum over Dore referendum. Love it. You're popular, Andrea. Thanks to Professor Harvey K. and everybody in the chat for mixing it up. Always grateful to you, and to MIDI Doctors and Walrus for working those algorithms, and huge thanks to Bob, Chokin, and Orb for keeping this chat room troll free. I gotta tell you guys, I have never felt it more than this week. I am so grateful to you for being a part of the show, for supporting the show, for recognizing what we're trying to do on this show. There's a lot happening online right now. There's a lot of bad stuff, bad actors who I don't know what their motivations are other than money, but we try to operate in good faith. We try to present the most knowledgeable folks on this show who can offer strategy, historic perspective, great commentary. And we try to have a diverse group of voices from different backgrounds, different perspectives. We try very hard to make this show work for the left so that we can build something rather than tear something apart. It's hard because last week was very divisive. Actually, it's more than last week. And the reason why I discussed all these things on today's show is because I wanted to kind of break down why this division happens, not calling out the division, but also why. What is the monetization structure behind it? And I know that we're probably gonna be discussing this much more in the future, but super grateful to you all. It is not easy to be in the movement right now, but we're on the side of justice. And even though the levers of power are almost universally controlled by capital, it really does take strength and solidarity, not as a hashtag, but as a movement, and recognizing what leverage we have, how to use that leverage, and to think very skillfully and to protect our folks. So I'm grateful that you guys have had my back in the last few days. I've gotten a lot of messages from folks. Special shout out to the folks who've sent me the troll analyzer tools, the bots. I was able to analyze how many people coming at my Twitter were bots, and it's a lot, but those bots boost the algorithm so that sometimes it looks like maybe one side is more popular than the other. But I'm going to tell you, I think AOC is more popular than anybody out there trying to instigate left on left violence. So thank you to you all. We will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow is our last live show before the holidays, and we are going to be we have a bunch of interviews that we're going to be airing, so you definitely want to check out the show if you can every day from Tuesday to Friday at 3 p.m. We have some great deep dive interviews that we're going to be producing, and also I'm going to be doing more live streams at night, so make sure to subscribe and click that alert button, that bell, so you know when we go on at night. Thank you to everybody. We will see you tomorrow.